For 20 years, Rita walked the silent corridors of the mansion as a living part of that place marked by memory. But when a muffled cry begins to echo, always at midnight, she realizes that something is wrong behind the walls she knows so well. What seemed like just a strange sound turns into a solitary investigation that leads her to a secret passage, and a cruel secret. Now, surrounded by lies and threatened by the one who should protect her, she needs to act fast, before silence dominates everything again. Chapter 1. The sun was still struggling to break through the morning fog when Michael drove through the main gate of St. Benedict's Ranch for the first time. The dirt road snaked between weather-worn fences and gnarled trees that seemed to hold ancient secrets. He gripped the steering wheel of the old pickup truck, trying not to show the anxiety that had been tightening its grip on his chest since he'd left Denver 3 days earlier. In the back seat, Claire hummed softly a song her mother used to sing, oblivious to the worries that plagued her father. In the distance, the first sounds of the ranch began to come to life. The deep whinnying of horses, the hoarse lowing of a few cattle, and occasionally short, sharp barks that echoed between the barns. Michael parked near the main house, an old structure of exposed brick and a clay tile roof that had seen better days. A tall, broad-shouldered man approached, wiping dirt-stained hands on a yellowish cloth that hung from his belt. Walter was the kind of man who carried authority without needing to say much. His brown eyes assessed everything with precision, like someone who had learned to read imperceptible signs in animals and people. He extended a hand to Michael with a firm grip, then knelt to be at eye level with Claire, who was watching him with a child's curiosity mixed with shyness. "Welcome to the ranch, little one. We work with animals that need help here. You'll have to be careful, you hear? There are places you can't go by yourself." Claire nodded, her pigtails bobbing with the movement. Michael silently thanked the man for his kindness, but felt the weight behind the words. This was not an ordinary place. This wasn't a trip to the countryside. It was a territory of scars, both on the animals and on the people who worked there. In the following days, Michael plunged into the intense routine of the ranch. He woke before dawn, when the early morning chill still bit at his skin, and worked until the sun set behind the distant mountains. He fed skittish horses that shied away at the slightest sudden movement. He mended fences that separated aggressive cattle rescued from abuse. He cleaned stalls, hauled hay, observed behaviors, and learned from the more experienced ranch hands. All this while keeping a constant eye on Claire, who spent her days exploring the permitted areas under the supervision of Mrs. Lucy, the ranch cook. Mrs. Lucy was a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and a soft heart. She had raised 4 children on her own and understood the struggle of a widowed father trying to rebuild his life. She took on Claire as an extra responsibility without asking for anything in return, only asking that Michael not worry too much during his work. The girl helped peel vegetables, sorted beans on a large sieve, and listened to old stories about the ranch while the pot of rice sizzled on the wood-burning stove. It was during one of those quiet afternoons in the kitchen that Claire first heard about Rex. 2 ranch hands were talking quietly outside, thinking no one was listening. They spoke of a dog that no one could control, an animal too dangerous to be saved, a beast that had once been a hero but was now just rage condensed into muscle and teeth. Claire said nothing to Mrs. Lucy, but she stored every word in her memory. That night, lying on the thin mattress in the small room she shared with her father, she asked about the dog everyone was afraid of. Michael hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He explained that there was a dog at the ranch who was going through a difficult time, that sometimes animals got sad and scared just like people, and that it was important to respect their space. Claire listened in silence, but her eyes shone with a curiosity Michael knew all too well. It was the same one her mother had when she found something she needed to understand. The first time Claire saw Rex was by accident, or maybe not. There was something about that ranch that seemed to guide her steps to places she shouldn't go. It was the middle of a hot Saturday afternoon, and she had gone out to explore while Mrs. Lucy was taking a nap after lunch. She followed a narrow path between 2 barns, drawn by the buzzing of cicadas and the smell of dry grass. That's when she saw the isolated enclosure in the farthest corner of the property. Unlike the other fences, this one was reinforced with thick wire mesh and wooden posts driven deep into the ground. There were no other animals nearby. It was as if that space were an island, separate from the rest of the ranch. Claire approached slowly, her bare feet sinking into the warm earth. And then she saw him. Rex was in the center of the enclosure, lying in the scarce shade of a dead tree. Even from a distance, his imposing presence was clear. His dark, dense coat, his ears pricked in constant alert, the muscles tense beneath his skin. He wasn't just big, he was a presence, a contained force waiting to explode. Claire stopped a few yards away, making no sound, just watching. The dog turned his head slowly toward her. His eyes were a deep brown, almost black, and they carried something the girl couldn't name. It wasn't rage, as the adults said. It was something older, sadder. It was like looking at someone who had gotten lost inside himself and no longer knew the way back. They stayed like that for a time Claire couldn't measure. She didn't blink, afraid of breaking the fragile moment. Rex didn't move either. He just watched, studied. Perhaps he wondered what this small, unprotected creature was doing there. Or perhaps he recognized something in her that others couldn't see. "Claire!" Michael's voice cut through the air like a whip, and Rex leaped to his feet, growling low. Michael came running, pulling his daughter away from the fence by her shoulders, his heart pounding in his chest. Walter appeared right after, sweating and breathing heavily. "You can't go near this enclosure, girl. This dog is dangerous. He could hurt you." Claire looked at her father, then at Walter, and finally back at Rex, who was now pacing back and forth inside the enclosure, agitated by the interruption. She didn't understand their fear. To her, Rex didn't seem dangerous. He seemed lonely. That night, Michael had a serious talk with his daughter. He explained that some animals carried invisible wounds, that they had been through bad things and no longer knew how to trust. He said that Rex had been a police dog, trained to protect people, but that something had happened on a mission and he was never the same. Claire listened to everything, nodding at the right moments, but Michael could see she wasn't truly convinced. There was a quiet stubbornness in those green eyes that were identical to her mother's. The following days brought a strange routine. Claire began to spend more time near Rex's enclosure, always respecting the distance her father had demanded, but never ceasing to watch. She would bring an old notebook her grandmother had given her and draw while sitting in the shade of a nearby fence. She drew trees, birds, clouds, and sometimes she tried to draw Rex, though she could never quite capture that look that haunted her in her dreams. Rex, for his part, changed his behavior. Before, he spent his days pacing in circles inside the enclosure, growling at anyone who approached to leave food or water. But now, whenever Claire appeared, he would stop. He would stand still, watching. He didn't bark, he didn't show his teeth, he just followed her with his eyes, as if he were waiting for her to do something, say something, prove something. The ranch hands started to notice. During lunch in the main house, they would talk about it in low voices. Some found it strange, others thought it was dangerous. Tony, a man in his late 50s who had worked there since he was young, said that animals felt things that people didn't, that the dog must sense that the girl was pure, without malice, without real fear. Walter listened to it all in silence, chewing slowly, thinking. Michael thought too. He thought while he fixed gates, while he broke in young colts, while he helped medicate a steer that had injured its leg. He thought about the wife he had lost 2 years ago to a disease that had progressed too quickly. He thought about how Claire had shut down afterward, how she had stopped smiling for months, how he had felt he was failing as a father by not being able to bring the light back to his daughter's eyes. And now in this unexpected place, something was happening. Something he didn't understand, but that seemed to be waking Claire up again. One afternoon, while carrying bags of feed to the storage shed, Michael saw Claire from a distance, sitting near Rex's enclosure. She wasn't drawing, she was just there, cross-legged, looking at the dog who was looking back at her. There was a stillness to the scene that squeezed Michael's heart. It was like watching two lonely souls trying to communicate across a chasm that no one else could cross. That night, after putting Claire to bed, Michael sought out Walter. He found him in the tool shed, organizing ropes and harnesses by the light of a dim lantern. Michael asked about Rex's past, about what had really happened. Walter sighed deeply, like someone who knows it's time to tell a story they would rather forget. He was the best Michael, the best dog that unit ever had, saved lives, found missing people. He was precise, obedient, loyal, until that day. What day? Walter wiped his hands on the cloth, avoiding the other man's gaze. A child was kidnapped, a big operation. Rex was sent in to track. He found the girl, managed to get to her before anyone else. But when he rescued her, she was terrified, screaming, crying, thrashing. I think the dog scared her even more. The officers arrived and pulled the child away from him. They said he had been too aggressive, that he had frightened the victim. After that, Rex never obeyed properly again. He started reacting badly, would lash out when they tried to control him. They say he was traumatized, that he associated the rescue with punishment. No one could work with him anymore. Michael remained silent, processing. Walter continued. They sent him here as a last chance. But I don't know if he can be saved. I've tried everything. Nothing works. He's trapped inside his own head. And my daughter. Walter finally looked at Michael. I can't explain it. I've never seen anything like it. It's as if he recognizes something in her, as if she reminds him of something, but it's dangerous, Michael. No matter what it looks like, he's still a wounded animal, and wounded animals are unpredictable. Michael knew Walter was right, but he also knew he couldn't just forbid Claire from feeling what she was feeling. The girl had lost her mother too soon. She had been through a pain no child should ever know, and now, for the first time in a long time, there was something that lit a spark in her, something that made her want to wake up in the morning, something that brought color back to the grey world that had taken over after the funeral. In the following weeks, a silent routine was established. Claire continued to visit Rex, always under the discreet watch of an adult. Sometimes it was Michael, other times it was Tony or even Walter. She didn't try to get any closer. She just sat there drawing, humming softly, existing, and Rex did the same. He would lie down near the fence on the inside and watch her. Sometimes he would sleep, something he rarely did when others were around. He started eating better, too. The water in his bowl was no longer left untouched for days. One morning, Claire did something different. She brought a book that her mother used to read to her before bed. She sat down near the fence and began to read aloud. They were simple stories about talking animals, magical forests, and unlikely adventures. Her voice still had that childish tone, stumbling over more difficult words, but there was a pure sincerity in every syllable. Rex's ears perked up. He approached the fence, closer than he usually did. He sat down on the other side of the wire, so close that Claire could hear his heavy breathing. She didn't stop reading. She showed no fear or surprise. She just continued, turning pages, bringing to life characters that only existed in imagination. From across the yard, Michael watched everything with a heart torn between hope and terror. Walter was beside him, also, watching in silence. Neither of them dared to interrupt. When Claire finished the first chapter and closed the book, she looked at Rex. The dog stared back at her, and for a fleeting instant, Michael swore he saw something soften in those hard eyes. A crack, a glimpse of what he had once been before he got lost in his own shadows. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, something changed at the ranch. It wasn't something visible or measurable, it was a feeling, as if the air had become less heavy, as if something that had been trapped for a long time was slowly starting to come loose. David, an older ranch hand who usually worked quietly in the farthest corners of the ranch, observed everything from a distance. He was a man of few words and many scars, both on his skin and in his soul. He had worked there for over 15 years, ever since retiring from the police force. Few knew that he had also been part of that operation. Few knew that he was there on that terrible day that changed Rex forever. And now, seeing that little girl sitting by the enclosure, reading stories to a dog everyone considered a lost cause, David felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt that maybe, just maybe, some wounds could be healed, not with force, not with punishment or training, but with something simpler and much harder at the same time, with presence, with patience, with the willingness to just be there, demanding nothing, expecting nothing, judging nothing. Night fell over St. Benedict's ranch, bringing with it the chorus of crickets and the distant howl of some wild animal. Claire slept peacefully that night, dreaming of a large dog running free in endless fields. It took Michael a long time to fall asleep, thinking about all the decisions that had brought him here. Walter checked Rex's enclosure one last time before turning in, making sure everything was secure. And Rex, for the first time in years, slept without nightmares. He slept with the memory of a child's voice reading stories about impossible worlds. He slept with the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way back to the light. Chapter 2. The mornings at the ranch began to take on a different rhythm. Michael would wake to the rooster's crow and find Claire already sitting up in bed, hastily braiding her hair, eager to start the day. She would eat breakfast quickly, help Mrs. Lucy with some light task, and as soon as possible, head to her usual spot near Rex's enclosure. The routine repeated with a consistency that surprised everyone. Walter observed it all with the eyes of someone who had seen a lot in his life, but never anything like this. In his 30 years of working with animals, he had learned that rehabilitation was a long, painful, and often frustrating process. It required technique, patience, and above all, consistency. But what was happening between that child and that dog defied everything he knew. There was no method there, no formal training. It was something primitive and pure that escaped any manual. During one particularly hot afternoon, when the sun seemed to melt even the shadows, Claire did something that stopped the hearts of everyone watching. She moved closer to the fence than ever before. Not by much, just a few steps beyond the limit Michael had set. But it was enough for Rex to react. The dog leaped to his feet, tense, his ears pinned back. For a second it looked like he would snarl, attack, do something that would prove all the warnings were right. But then Claire did something unexpected. She sat down on the ground. She simply plopped down right there, cross-legged, and began to draw in the dirt with a stick. She didn't look at Rex. She didn't try to call him. She showed no fear or hesitation. She just drew. Rex remained motionless, confused. This didn't fit any pattern he knew. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an invasion. It was just a child existing, in her own world, indifferent to the danger he supposedly represented. Slowly his muscles relaxed. His ears returned to their normal position. He approached the inner fence, sniffing the air, trying to understand. Michael, who was watching from a distance with Tony at his side, felt his legs tremble. He wanted to run over and pull his daughter away, but something held him in place. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was desperation disguised as faith. Or maybe it was simply the understanding that this moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to Claire and Rex, and any interference could break something fragile that was being built. Claire continued to draw. She traced circles, lines, shapes that meant nothing specific, but that came out of her like breathing. And then, without much thought, she drew something that made Rex react violently. It was a simple, slightly crooked symbol she swore she had seen in a dream the night before. It looked like a star inside a shield, with 2 crossed lines underneath. Rex began to pace back and forth, panting, agitated. It wasn't aggression, it was recognition, it was memory forcing its way through barriers he had built to protect himself. He barked, a deep, desperate sound that echoed throughout the entire ranch. Claire looked up, startled, but didn't move. David, who was feeding the horses in the nearby barn, dropped everything and ran. When he saw the drawing on the ground, his face went pale. He recognized that symbol immediately. It was the insignia of the Special Operations Unit Rex had belonged to. The same one stamped on the uniforms on that terrible day. The same one Rex saw every time he looked at his former partners, before everything fell apart. How do you know that symbol? David's voice came out harsher than he intended. Claire turned, confused by the intensity of the question. I dreamed about it. It was in a dark place, and there were a lot of men wearing it on their clothes. And there was a dog that looked like Rex. But he was happy. He was working. David felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't believe in mystical coincidences or supernatural connections, but he also couldn't rationally explain how this girl, who had no contact with the police world, had drawn that exact symbol, and more importantly, how Rex had recognized it instantly. That night, David sought out Michael. They sat on the porch of the main house, sharing a pot of reheated coffee as the stars began to appear in the cloudless sky. David spoke for the first time about things he had kept locked away for years. He spoke about the operation, about the kidnapped girl, about how everything had gone wrong in ways no one had foreseen. The child was 6 years old, the same age as your Claire. She'd been missing for 3 days when we finally located where she was. Rex was the first one in. He had an incredible sense of smell, a tracking ability that saved dozens of lives over the years. He found the girl tied up in a dark basement, terrified, dehydrated. When he approached to signal her location to us, she panicked. Michael listened in silence, the coffee growing cold in the mug between his hands. The girl started screaming, screams that pierced the soul. Rex didn't know what to do. He had been trained to protect, to rescue, but never to deal with the terror of a victim who saw him as another threat. When we arrived, the scene was chaotic. The child was thrashing. Rex was trying to back away, but he was in a small space. The other dogs were barking outside. One of the officers rushed in and kicked Rex away from the girl, said the dog was attacking her. He wasn't. He was just confused, trying to do his job while being rejected by the one he was supposed to be saving. And after, David took a long sip of the bitter coffee. They opened an investigation. They said Rex was unstable, that he posed a danger. They ignored all his years of impeccable service. One mistake, and just like that, everything else was erased. He was removed from duty, went through evaluations. They tried to retrain him, but something broke in him that day. He started associating obedience with punishment. He started seeing humans as creatures who hurt him for no reason. He stopped trusting. And without trust, a working dog is just a scared and dangerous animal. Michael processed it all slowly. He thought of his own daughter, of how she also carried invisible scars. He thought of how everyone, humans and animals, could be broken by experiences they couldn't process alone. Why did you never tell this before? Because it hurts, Michael. Because I was there. I saw it all happen and I did nothing. I didn't defend the dog when he needed it. I kept quiet when they said he was dangerous. And ever since, I've carried that guilt. Seeing him here in this state is a constant reminder of what I should have done differently. The two men sat in silence for a long time, just listening to the crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was David who broke the silence. Your daughter is doing what we all failed to do. She's giving him back his trust. Not with technique, not with force, but with pure and simple presence. She demands nothing from him. She doesn't judge him. She's just there. And maybe that's exactly what Rex has always needed. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic of the ranch changed visibly. Claire began to read to Rex every day. Sometimes it was stories from the books she had brought from home. Other times it was stories she made up herself, improvised narratives about brave dogs and adventurous children. Rex listened to everything lying on the other side of the fence as close as the wire would allow. Walter began to notice changes in the dog's behavior. Rex ate all his meals now. He slept better. His growls became rare. When the ranch hands approached for fence maintenance, he would still be alert, but no longer with that blind aggression from before. It was as if a layer of rage was being slowly peeled away, revealing the animal he had once been underneath. One afternoon, Claire asked her father for permission to try something different. She wanted to test if Rex still remembered basic commands. Michael hesitated. So did Walter. But there was something in that girl's determination that made them want to believe it was possible. Claire approached the fence, not as close as that time she drew the symbol, but closer than usual. She looked at Rex, who was watching her with total attention. She cleared her throat nervous and said in the firmest voice she could manage, "Sit, Rex." Nothing happened. The dog just kept looking. Claire tried again, this time with more confidence. "Sit." Rex tilted his head to the side as if processing the request. And then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he sat. It was a clumsy movement, as if his muscles had forgotten how to do it after so long. But he sat. The silence that followed was broken by a joyful shout from Claire. She jumped, clapped her hands, and her smile was so wide and genuine that even Walter felt a lump in his throat. Michael had tears in his eyes, not just because the dog had obeyed, but because his daughter was happy, truly happy, something he hadn't seen since before her mother's illness. In the following days, Claire continued to test commands. Down, stay, come. Rex responded to. Some ignored others, but there was an attempt there, a bridge being rebuilt between what he had been and what he could still become. David observed it all with a mixture of fascination and redemption. He began to help Claire discreetly, teaching her about canine body language, about tone of voice, about patience. He never mentioned his past with Rex, but there was an intensity in his teachings that suggested something deeper than simple generosity. One night, while everyone was asleep, David left his cabin and walked to Rex's enclosure. The full moon illuminated everything with a ghostly clarity. The dog was awake as always, his sleep light and full of starts. When he saw David approach, he tensed, ready to react. David stopped at a safe distance. He stood there in silence, just looking at the animal he had known under different circumstances. After a long time, he spoke softly, more to himself than to the dog. "I'm sorry, partner. I should have defended you. I should have fought for you when you needed it. But I'm going to do the right thing now. I'm going to make sure you get the chance you deserve." Rex didn't respond, of course, but something in his posture seemed less hostile. As if, on some deep instinctive level, he recognized that those words were not empty. The weeks turned into a month. Claire grew bolder, getting closer and closer to the fence. Michael allowed it, always watching, always ready to intervene. But intervention was never necessary. Rex never showed aggression toward Claire. On the contrary, he seemed to eagerly await her visits. When she was late for some reason, he would become restless, pacing back and forth, whining softly. It was Walter who suggested the next step. He didn't believe in miracles, but he believed what he saw. And what he saw was a dog transforming. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time since Rex had arrived at the ranch, there was real hope. One morning, with Michael, David, Tony, and even Mrs. Lucy watching from a safe distance, Walter opened the gate to Rex's enclosure. Not all the way, just a crack. Claire was on the outside, sitting as always, reading a book. Rex was inside, watching. Walter said nothing. He didn't call the dog. He gave no commands. He just opened the gate and stepped back, leaving the choice to Rex. The dog looked at the opening, then at Claire, then back at the gate. This was a test, a choice between remaining in the known safety of his prison or risking the unknown. Slowly, with cautious steps, Rex began to move toward the gate. He stopped at the entrance, sniffing the open air he hadn't felt in so long. Claire continued reading, pretending not to notice, though her heart was beating so hard she swore everyone could hear it. Rex took one step out of the enclosure, then another and another. He walked slowly, to where Claire was, each step a battle against instincts of flight or fight. And then, when he was just a foot and a half away from her, he sat. He simply sat, just as she had taught him. Claire stopped reading. She looked at the dog, who was now closer than he had ever been. She could see every detail of his face, the small scars on his muzzle, the white hairs beginning to appear around his eyes, the intelligence and pain mixed in his gaze. With slow, almost reverent movements, Claire extended her hand, not to touch, just to offer. Rex sniffed it, once, twice, and then, in a gesture that made all the adults present hold their breath, he rested his muzzle in the palm of her hand. It was a gentle, hesitant touch, laden with meanings that words could not capture. Claire smiled. It wasn't a smile of victory or conquest. It was a smile of recognition, of two wounded souls who had found each other at the right time, in the right place, and decided to try to heal together. At that moment, under the strong midday sun in Cheyenne, Wyoming, surrounded by calloused men, who had seen it all but never anything like this, a traumatized dog and a motherless girl began to write a story of redemption that no one had imagined was possible. Chapter 3. The months that followed that first touch transformed not only Rex and Claire, but the entire ranch. It was as if a different energy had taken over the place, something lighter and more hopeful that contrasted with the years of hard work and accumulated failures. The other animals seemed to feel it too. Previously skittish horses would calm down when Claire passed by, rescued dogs that barked. At any movement would stop to watch her with curiosity. Rex now spent most of his days outside the enclosure, always near Claire, but maintaining a respectful distance. He would follow her when she went to help Mrs. Lucy in the kitchen, lie in the shade while she drew and trail her steps when she explored the safe corners of the ranch. It wasn't the blind obedience he had shown in his police days. It was something deeper. It was chosen devotion. Michael watched it all with mixed feelings. Part of him was proud of his daughter, amazed at what she had accomplished. But another part, the part that had lost a wife too soon and knew how fragile life could be, was afraid. He was afraid that Rex would revert to what he was before. He feared that some trigger would bring back the traumatized animal. He feared that his daughter was getting too attached to something that could still break. Walter, on the other hand, began to see possibilities. If Rex could be brought back, maybe there was hope for other cases considered lost. He began to document the process, noting every bit of progress, every interaction, every behavioral change. It wasn't a scientific study, but it was a record, something that could help other animals, other ranches, other stories that seemed to have no way out. It was David who first noticed the signs that something was changing in Claire as well. The girl who had arrived at the ranch withdrawn and quiet was now talking more. She laughed easily. She told stories about her mother without the sadness completely overwhelming the memories. It was as if Rex wasn't just being healed by her, but she was also being healed through him. One afternoon, while Claire was brushing Rex with an old brush Walter had lent her, she began to talk about things she had kept inside for so long. She talked about how she was afraid of forgetting her mother's face, about how she felt guilty for being happy sometimes, as if joy were a betrayal to the memory of the one who was gone. Rex just stood there, motionless, letting her express everything she needed to express, without judgment, without rush. Michael, listening from behind the barn, felt his chest tighten. He had never known how to help his daughter process that loss. He felt inadequate, lost in his own grief while trying to be strong for her. But here was a traumatized dog, with no words, no elaborate advice, offering exactly what Claire needed. Presence. Acceptance. The freedom to feel everything without having to explain or justify it. That night, Michael had a long talk with Walter about the future. The contract at the ranch was temporary, originally intended as a way to start over while he decided on his next steps. But now, with everything that was happening, the idea of leaving seemed impossible. Claire had found something precious here, and he, Michael, had found something too. A community, a purpose, a place where his daughter could be a child again. Walter listened attentively. When Michael finished, the older man smiled in a way he rarely did. "You and the girl brought something good here, Michael. I can't quite explain it, but the place is different. More human, if that makes any sense. It would be good to have you around for longer. And Rex, well, I don't think he'd survive if Claire left now." Michael knew it was true. The bond between the two had surpassed all logic. It was visceral, deep, the kind that doesn't always make sense but cannot be denied. The days continued to pass, bringing with them small victories and constant challenges. Rex learned to walk on a leash again, something he had violently refused before. He learned to approach other humans without reacting aggressively, though he still kept a cautious distance from everyone except Claire and, surprisingly, David. David and Rex developed a strange relationship. It wasn't like the bond the dog had with Claire, but there was a mutual understanding there. Perhaps Rex, on some instinctive level, recognized David from his previous life. Perhaps he sensed the guilt the man carried and understood that he, like Rex, was trying to atone for a past he couldn't change. One morning, David showed up with an old box full of objects from his time on the police force. Inside were photos, medals, documents yellowed with age. And there, among everything, was a photo of Rex in his glory days. Young, strong, with a shiny coat and alert eyes. Beside him, a group of smiling officers, all wearing uniforms with the insignia Claire had drawn that day. David showed the photo to the girl. She studied it for a long time running her fingers over the faded image. "He looks happy here." He was. He was the best. Saved a lot of lives. He was a real hero. Claire looked at Rex, who was lying a few feet away, watching them with curiosity. "He's still a hero, just in a different way now." The child's words hit David with unexpected force. She was right. Rex didn't need to be in dangerous operations to be important. Every day he was choosing to live despite the pain. He was teaching everyone about resilience, about second chances, about how it's possible to rebuild even when everything seems lost. That week, something unexpected happened. A group of young veterinarians from a nearby university visited the ranch as part of a study on animal rehabilitation. Walter welcomed them, showing them the facilities and explaining the methods they used. When they got to Rex's case, the full story was told. From his arrival as a dog, considered beyond recovery, to his transformation through his relationship with Claire. The students were fascinated. They asked to observe the interaction between the girl and the dog. Claire, shy at first with so many strangers, soon forgot her embarrassment and was simply herself. She sat with Rex, talked to him, asked him to sit and lie down, and rewarded him with pets when he obeyed. And Rex, who had once growled at veterinarians who tried to examine him in the early months, remained calm and cooperative. One of the students, a young woman with short hair and observant eyes named Frances, approached Michael afterward. "What your daughter has done is extraordinary. There's no formal technique in it, but there's something much more powerful. There's a genuine connection, there's empathy, there's time. Many animal rehabilitation programs fail because they focus only on behavior, not on the emotional trauma. You've proven that it's possible to heal the emotional side, and the behavior follows naturally." Michael didn't know what to say. He just nodded, proud in a way that couldn't be put into words. But not everything was perfect. There were difficult moments too. Days when Rex seemed to regress, becoming agitated for no apparent reason, refusing food, avoiding contact. On those days, Claire learned to respect his space. She would stay nearby but not force interaction. Sometimes she would just sit and read aloud from a distance, letting him know she was there if he needed her, but that there was no obligation. Michael learned a lot by watching his daughter in those moments. She was only 6, but she possessed an emotional wisdom that many adults took decades to develop. She knew when to push and when to back off. She knew when to speak and when to simply be silent. It was a gift, and Michael wondered if her mother wouldn't be proud to see what the girl had become. Tony, the oldest ranch hand, used to say that animals chose people, not the other way around, that there was something mystical about these connections, something that went beyond human understanding. Michael, who had always been a practical man, was beginning to believe it. There was no other explanation for what had happened. Rex and Claire had found each other at the moment they both needed it most, and that meeting saved them both. The seasons began to change. The intense heat of summer gave way to the first signs of rain. The sky, once always blue and clear, began to accumulate heavy clouds. The animals felt the change in the air, becoming restless, more alert. A storm was approaching. Everyone could feel it, not just in the weather, but in something more intangible, as if the universe was preparing for something important. Rex felt it too. He began to stay closer to Claire, almost glued to her during the day. At night, he would sleep in front of the small room where she and Michael stayed like a silent guardian. Michael allowed it, recognizing that this wasn't possessiveness or unhealthy dependence. It was protection. It was a dog rediscovering his purpose. One particularly heavy afternoon, when the air was so humid it felt hard to breathe, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. He was a middle-aged man, dressed in civilian clothes but with a posture that screamed authority. He was looking for Rex. He came from the old police unit, having heard rumors of the dog's recovery through a veterinarian who knew the students who had visited the ranch. Walter received him cautiously. The man, who introduced himself as Captain Evans, explained that he had been the commander of the unit when Rex was still serving, that he had always believed the dog deserved a second chance, but he had been outvoted when they decided to remove him from duty. He wanted to see with his own eyes if it was true that Rex was better. Michael was called. The tension was palpable. No one knew how Rex would react to someone from his past. When Captain Evans approached the yard where Rex was resting, the dog immediately stood up. His ears went back. A low growl began to form in his chest. Claire, who was nearby, noticed the change. She approached Rex, gently placing a hand on his neck. The growl stopped, but the tension remained. Evans stopped at a safe distance, observing. He stood, like that for long minutes, just looking at the animal that had once been one of his best agents. "Rex, do you still remember me, partner?" The captain's voice was soft, laced with something that sounded like remorse. Rex didn't respond, but he didn't attack either. He was torn between the past and the present, between what he had been and what he was becoming. "I'm sorry for what happened. You didn't deserve that. None of us protected you like we should have. But I'm glad to see you've found something better than that life. You found peace in this. Little girl here, she gave you what we never could. She gave you the chance to just be you, without impossible expectations, without punishment for being too human in a job that didn't allow for weakness." Evans turned to leave, but before he did, he stopped and looked at Michael. "Take good care of him. And of your daughter too, they're both special." After the captain left, Rex was restless for the rest of the day. That visit had stirred something in him, brought back memories he was trying to keep buried. Claire stayed by his side the whole time, speaking softly, offering comfort in the only way she knew how. At night, when everyone else was asleep, David went out to do his usual rounds. He found Rex sitting in the middle of the yard, looking up at the dark sky where storm clouds were gathering. The old ranch hand sat down beside the dog, not too close, respecting his space, but close enough for Rex to know he wasn't alone. "It's going to rain hard tomorrow. It always rains hard when life is about to change. You feel it too, don't you? Something big is coming." Rex turned, his head to look at David, and in that gaze there was an understanding. They both knew that the calm of the past few months was coming to an end, that something was coming, something that would test everything that had been built, that would prove whether the transformation was real or just a temporary illusion. The first drops began to fall just as the sun had barely risen. Within a few hours, they turned into a deluge. The wind howled between the barns, tearing off roof tiles and knocking down branches. The animals grew agitated, sensitive to nature's fury. And in the midst of it all, Claire slept peacefully, trusting that the world would still be safe when she woke up, unaware that this day would change everything forever. Chapter 4. The storm arrived with a ferocity that few at the ranch could remember seeing. The sky turned so dark in the middle of the day that it felt like night, and the thunder shook the ground as if the earth itself were screaming. Michael woke up with Claire clinging to him, frightened by the noise. Outside he could hear the men running, shouting instructions to each other, trying to protect the animals and the structures that threatened to collapse. "Get dressed quickly, honey. We're going to help bring the animals into the shelters." Claire obeyed, putting on her clothes with eyes still puffy from sleep. Her first concern, even before pulling on her boots, was Rex. Where was he? Was he safe? Was he afraid of storms? Michael saw the worry on his daughter's face and tried to reassure her. "Rex is fine. He's strong. He's been through worse. But we need to help the other animals now." They went out together into the chaos the ranch had become. The rain fell in sheets so thick you could barely see a few feet ahead. The wind ripped at anything that wasn't tied down. Tony and two other ranch hands were struggling to close the main gate, which was threatening to be torn from its hinges. Walter was shouting orders, trying to coordinate the effort to save what could be saved. Michael went to help move the horses into the main, sturdier barn. Claire stayed near the house, holding a bucket Mrs. Lucy had given her to collect water that was leaking through the roof, but her eyes never stopped searching. Where was Rex? Then she saw him, in the middle of the yard, soaked to the bone, motionless as a statue despite the storm raging around him. He was watching her intently, and Claire understood immediately. He hadn't taken shelter because he was waiting for her. He was there in the midst of nature's fury, fulfilling the only purpose that mattered to him now, protecting her. Claire dropped the bucket and ran to Rex. Michael yelled for her to come back, but the wind carried his voice away. The girl reached the dog and knelt in the mud, hugging him with all the strength her small arms could muster. Rex didn't move. He just let her cling to him, offering the only comfort he could in the middle of the chaos. It was David who saw them first. He ran over, scooped Claire into his arms despite her protests, and practically dragged Rex into the nearest barn. Once sheltered from the worst of the storm, David set Claire down and looked at her sternly. "Don't you ever do that again. Don't you ever run out in the middle of a storm like this, understand?" Claire nodded, but her arms were still wrapped around Rex, refusing to let go. The dog was trembling, not from the cold, but from some old memory the storm had brought to the surface. Claire sensed it and began to softly sing the same song she had sung in the car on their first day. Her mother's song, the song that calmed everything. The storm lasted for hours. When it finally began to pass, it left a trail of destruction in its wake. Part of the old barn's roof had collapsed. Fences were down. Uprooted trees blocked paths. But the worst was yet to come. One of the gates of the paddock where they kept the young horses in training had given way, and Tempest, a colt of only 2 years, recently rescued from a situation of neglect and still very skittish, had escaped. The animal was in an absolute panic, running aimlessly, a danger to both himself and anyone who crossed his path. Walter quickly gathered the men. They needed to contain the horse before he hurt himself or caused a bigger accident. Michael was among them, having left Claire in Mrs. Lucy's care inside the house. But children have a special talent for being exactly where they shouldn't be. Claire, curious about all the commotion, slipped out the back of the house without Mrs. Lucy noticing. She wanted to see what was happening. She had heard the men talking about the loose horse and thought she could help. After all, animals liked her. Maybe she could calm the colt just as she had calmed Rex. Rex, who had stayed near the house as Michael had asked, noticed Claire leaving. He immediately followed her, silent, alert. There was something different in the air, a tension that his trained instincts recognized. Danger. Claire walked through the back of the ranch, following the sound of distant voices. That's when she saw Tempest. The horse was in the middle of the open field, sweating, his eyes wide with terror, nervously pawing at the soaked ground. He was beautiful, all black with a white blaze on his forehead, but at that moment he was a creature ruled by fear. The girl, in her childish innocence, thought she could help. She began to approach slowly, making soft sounds as she did with Rex. The horse saw her. For a second it looked like it might work. Tempest stopped, moving, watching the small figure approach. But then a late thunderclap cut through the silence, a final roar from the departing storm. The sound spooked the colt again, and he reared up, neighing loudly. When his front hooves hit the ground, he bolted, straight in Claire's direction. It all happened in a matter of seconds, but for Michael, who saw the scene from a distance, it felt like an eternity. He screamed his daughter's name. He started running, knowing he would never make it in time. Walter and the other men ran too, but they were too far away. Everyone saw, everyone understood. There was no way to prevent what was about to happen. But there was Rex. The dog had been following Claire since she left the house. He was just a few feet from her when the horse bolted. And at the exact moment disaster became inevitable, something inside Rex awakened. It wasn't the old training, it wasn't mechanical obedience to memorize commands. It was something much older and deeper. It was purpose. Rex launched himself with a speed no one there knew he still possessed. He crossed the space between himself and Claire in the blink of an eye, positioning himself between the girl and the stampeding horse. The impact was brutal. The colt, unable to stop on the wet ground, collided with Rex. The dog was thrown aside with tremendous force, his body spinning in the air before landing heavily on the ground. But it worked. The horse's trajectory was diverted. Claire was safe. Michael reached her first, scooping up his daughter, who was frozen in shock. Walter and Tony finally managed to contain Tempest, calming the animal, who, now exhausted, stopped resisting. But all eyes were on Rex. The dog tried to get up, but his legs gave way. There was blood, though it didn't seem like a dangerous amount, but it was clear he had been injured in the impact. David was the first to kneel beside him, his trembling hands checking for the injury. A broken rib, maybe 2, deep cuts on his flank, but nothing that looked fatal. Claire broke free from her father's arms and ran to Rex, falling to her knees in the mud beside him. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the light rain that was still falling. She placed her hands on the dog's face, forcing him to look at her. "You can't leave, you can't, I need you." Rex, with visible effort, licked her hand. It was his way of saying he was there, that he had done what he had to do, that he had chosen to protect her above his own safety, and he would do it again without hesitation. Walter was already on the phone, calling the vet from town. Mrs. Lucy appeared with blankets. Tony brought water. Everyone moved with an efficiency born from years of dealing with emergencies. But there was something different this time, a palpable emotion in the air. It wasn't just an injured animal. It was Rex. It was the dog everyone had considered a lost cause. It was living proof that redemption was possible. The vet arrived in record time, considering the roads damaged by the storm. He examined Rex right there in the field, as moving him seemed risky. He confirmed the broken ribs. He cleaned the wounds. He administered pain medication. And then, looking at the group of people surrounding the dog as if he were royalty, he said something no one would ever forget. "He's going to be okay. It'll hurt for a few weeks. He'll need rest and care. But he'll recover. This dog has more willpower than most humans I've met." The relief was collective. Claire didn't let go of Rex for a second during the entire process. She held his paw while the vet worked, whispered words of comfort, and promised she would stay by his side just as he had stayed by hers. In the weeks that followed, the entire ranch reorganized around Rex's recovery. A special space was prepared for him in the main house, near Michael and Claire's room. Mrs. Lucy cooked special meals to aid his healing. The ranch hands would stop by to visit him, each bringing a small offering to a hero, a bone, a makeshift toy, kind words. Claire never left his side. She slept on a mattress next to where Rex rested. She read to him during the day. She sang her mother's songs when she noticed he was in pain. And slowly, day by day, Rex got better. But the transformation wasn't just physical. Something fundamental had changed on the day of the storm. Rex hadn't just saved Claire. He had saved himself. By choosing to protect her above his own safety, he had found what he had lost in that traumatic mission years ago. He had found his purpose. He had found redemption. David visited Rex every day. Sometimes he would just sit there, in silence, watching. Other times he would talk, telling old stories, asking for forgiveness for things he had never said out loud. And Rex would listen, because listening was something he had learned to do again. A month after the incident, Rex was strong enough to walk again. He still had a slight limp, and probably would for the rest of his life, but he was alive. He was whole, and most importantly, he was at peace. Walter organized a small gathering on the porch of the main house. He was there, along with Michael, Claire, David, Tony, Mrs. Lucy, and a few other staff members. Frances, the veterinary student, was there too, having returned to the ranch when she heard about the incident, bringing an official document with her. The university, impressed with the story of Rex and Claire, had decided to offer a grant to have the story properly documented. They wanted to turn the case into educational material for future veterinarians and trainers. But more than that, they wanted to ensure that Rex received the care he deserved for the rest of his life, and that Michael, if he wished, would have financial support to continue his work at the ranch. Michael looked at his daughter, who was sitting on the floor with Rex lying beside her, the dog's head resting in her lap. He thought about everything they had been through, the loss, the pain, the journey to this unlikely place where they had found healing in each other. "We're staying. This is our home now." Claire smiled, that wide smile that Michael hadn't seen since before her mother passed. Rex, as if he understood, let out a deep sigh of contentment. David, on the other side of the porch, finally allowed himself to smile too. The guilt he had carried for years hadn't completely disappeared, but it was lighter. Rex had been saved, not in the way David had imagined, with heroic interventions or official second chances, but by something simpler and more powerful, by love, by patience, by a child who saw beyond what everyone else saw and decided to believe. The months that followed brought a new normal. Rex became an integral part of the ranch, not as an animal in rehabilitation, but as a member of the family. He helped with the other animals. his calm presence positively influencing even the most difficult cases. It was as if he was conveying the message that recovery was possible, that it was worth trying. Claire grew up there on the ranch, surrounded by animals and people who understood that scars didn't define you, that everyone carried something, humans and animals alike, and that true strength lay in choosing to move forward despite the wounds. Michael found peace too. He didn't forget his wife, he never would, but he learned that honoring her memory didn't mean living trapped in the past. It meant building something good in the present, something she would have been proud to see. And Rex, the dog everyone had considered a lost cause, proved to be the greatest lesson that Ranch had ever received. He proved that no one is beyond saving, that trauma is not destiny, that with the right person at the right time, even the most wounded souls can find their way back home. Years later, when Claire was a teenager and Rex was an old dog with white fur and slow steps, she would still sit with him at sunset, reading stories just as she had from the very first day. And Rex would still listen, his eyes closed in contentment, grateful for having had a second chance. Grateful for having found that little girl with pigtails and colorful boots who saw in him not a dangerous animal, but a soul that needed to be reminded it was loved. Because in the end, that's what saved Rex. It wasn't technique. It wasn't force. It was a 6-year-old girl who decided to unconditionally love, something that everyone said was beyond saving. And in doing so, she didn't just save a dog. She saved herself. And she showed everyone around them that redemption is always possible when there is someone willing to believe. Prologue. There are stories that are born from chance, and others that seem to have been written by destiny long before their characters ever meet. This is one of those stories that makes you believe that nothing happens by accident, that every pain, every loss, every scar has a greater purpose that only time reveals. On the outskirts of Cheyenne, Wyoming, where the dusty earth stretches as far as the eye can see, and the wind carries ancient secrets across the plains, there is a place few people know. It is not a famous place. It doesn't appear in magazines or newspapers. It is just an old ranch, surrounded by stories of failures and frustrated attempts. A place where animals considered lost are given one last chance before the world gives up on them completely. But this is not a story about a place. It is a story about souls. About 2 souls, to be precise, a child and a dog, both, carrying wounds that no one could see, but that bled inside them every day. Both lost in their own pain, unaware that the path back to the light passed through each other. Some say that animals don't feel like we do, that they don't suffer in the same way, that they don't carry traumas or memories that haunt them in the silent hours of the night. But whoever says that has never looked deep into the eyes of a dog who was once a hero and became a prisoner of his own fear, has never seen pain transform a protector into a threat, has never understood that sometimes the biggest cage is not made of bars, but of memories we cannot forget. Rex had a glorious past. He had been trained to save lives. He had run toward danger when everyone else fled. He had been a companion, a guardian, a hero, but a single mission, a single traumatic moment, was enough for it all to crumble, for the world to decide he no longer had value, that he was too dangerous to be saved, that his story had come to an end. What they didn't know is that some stories don't end when we think they do. They just wait for the right moment to begin again. Claire had her past too, a short past, as is expected of a child of only 6, but marked by a loss no child should know so young. Her mother, the person who was her entire world, had departed, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. And Claire, small and fragile as she was, carried this emptiness wherever she went. An invisible weight that stole the colors from the world and turned even the most beautiful days into something gray and meaningless. Michael, her father, did what he could. He worked double shifts, tried to smile when she looked, pretended everything was okay. But father and daughter knew the truth. They knew there was something broken in both of them that no amount of time or distance seemed to fix, until life, in its mysterious wisdom, brought them to that forgotten ranch in Wyoming. They say the Lord works in mysterious ways, that sometimes to find what we truly need, we must first become completely lost. Michael and Claire were lost when they arrived at St. Benedict's Ranch. Lost in their grief, in their longing, in their desperate attempt to find a new beginning. And Rex, trapped in that isolated enclosure, watched by men who feared him and considered him beyond any salvation, was also lost. Lost in his own shadows, unable to trust, unable to go back to being who he once was. But then something happened, something that no training manual, no sophisticated technique, no professional intervention had managed to do. Two wounded souls recognized each other. A girl and a dog looked at each other through an old fence on an ordinary day, and something in the universe shifted. A connection was formed. Silent, invisible, but powerful enough to begin healing wounds that everyone thought were permanent. This story is not about supernatural miracles or impossible events. It is about something simpler and, at the same time, more extraordinary. It is about the power of presence, about how sometimes all a wounded soul needs is someone who is willing to stay, someone who doesn't judge, who doesn't demand, who doesn't give up, someone who is just there day after day offering a constancy that says without words, "You are not alone, I believe in you, you still matter." Claire became that person for Rex, and Rex, without knowing it, became that presence for Claire. Together, without fully understanding what they were doing, they began a journey of healing that would transform not only their lives, but also the lives of everyone around them. Because that's how true redemption works. It doesn't happen in isolation. It spreads. It touches those who are near. It inspires. It challenges the cynicism of those who have seen too much and have stopped believing that change is possible. It proves that no story is truly over as long as there is someone willing to believe in a different ending. In the coming chapters, you will get to know this journey in detail. You will see the first glances exchanged through the fence. You will feel the tension when Claire approaches for the first time. You will hold your breath when Rex must choose between his traumatic past and an unknown future. You will cry when the storm comes, and you will celebrate when redemption finally happens. But before we begin, there is something important you need to know. This is not just a story about a girl and a dog. It is a story about all of us, about the wounds we carry, about the second chances we deserve, about how sometimes salvation comes from the most unlikely places and in the most unexpected ways. It is about remembering that no one is too lost to be found, that no pain is too great to be healed, that there is always hope even when everything seems to be over. So take a deep breath, open your heart, and prepare to meet Claire and Rex. Prepare for a story that will remind you that love, patience, and the simple willingness to believe can transform even the most wounded souls. They can take the broken pieces and build something new, something beautiful, something that proves that happy endings are not just for fairy tales, but also for those who had the courage not to give up when it would have been easier to just let go. This is the story of the reunion of two souls who, without knowing it, were searching for each other. A true story about redemption, hope, and the transformative power of simply being present. A story that begins on a forgotten ranch in Wyoming, but that could happen anywhere. There is someone willing to believe that change is possible. Welcome to St. Benedict's Ranch. Welcome to the story of Claire and Rex. Welcome to a journey that will touch your heart in ways you did not expect.